The Ghost of Old Fred, as told at the 1886 Crescent Hotel and Spa, Eureka Springs, Arkansas. This hotel does not let go. Frederick James Holloway, head butler, 1947 to 1989. 1. The corner table. We found him exactly where we'd been told he'd be. In the far right corner of the crystal dining room, where the morning light came through the tall windows in long amber shafts, sat an old man at a small round table by himself. A white coffee cup steamed in front of him. His hands, enormous, long-fingered hands that looked like they'd carried the weight of a century, were folded on the tablecloth. He wore a pressed tan linen shirt, a brown vest buttoned all the way up, and a pair of spectacles that had slid to the very end of his nose. He didn't look up when we walked in. The young hostess smiled at us and mouthed silently, "Old Fred." My college friend Marcus and I crossed the dining room, and as we drew close, the old man looked up without surprise, as though he'd been expecting us all along. "You the two young men Delroy sent?" he asked. His voice was low and unhurried, the kind that made a room feel smaller and quieter. "Yes, sir," Marcus said. "I'm Marcus. This is my friend. Delroy said you might take us on a private tour today." Fred looked us over with dark, patient eyes, then gestured to the two chairs across from him. "Sit down and have some coffee first," he said. "You can't tour this hotel on an empty stomach. This old place will eat you alive if you ain't got something in you." He said it with a half smile, but something in the way his eyes didn't quite smile with his mouth made me take the words more seriously than I should have at 8 in the morning. Something brushed against my ankle under the table. I looked down. An orange tabby cat, broad-shouldered, unhurried, with the supreme confidence of a creature who owned the room, was winding himself around the leg of my chair. "Don't mind him," Fred said, without looking down. "That's Jasper. He arrived on Halloween, 2009. Long black hair, white paws, arrived on Halloween. You'd think the hotel ordered him special." He smiled. "He took a liking to this corner. Morris used to sit in this corner, too." "Morris?" Marcus asked. Fred's face softened in a way that made him look just briefly like a younger man. "Morris," he said, "was the greatest cat I ever knew, and I've known some cats. Frederick James Holloway, Old Fred, as everyone called him, had come to the Crescent Hotel in the spring of 1947 as a boy of 15, hired as a maintenance assistant. He'd polished floors, repaired window sashes, hauled coal, and done every unglamorous task the old Victorian building demanded. Over the next 4 decades, he worked his way up. Porter, senior attendant, assistant butler, then head butler, before retiring in 1989. And then, because he simply could not stay away, he came back as a guide. "People ask me why I retired and then came right back," he said, pouring himself a second cup from the small carafe the waitress had left. "And I tell them, this hotel don't really let you go. You think you leave, but the hotel has other ideas." He said it the way you might say something funny. But again, the eyes. Jasper leapt up onto the empty 4th chair at our table, circled once, and settled into a precise loaf, facing the room. He had the alert stillness of a sentry. "Morris was an orange tabby," Fred continued, folding his hands around his cup. "Big fellow. Arrived in 1973 and immediately set about running this hotel the way he felt it ought to be run, which is to say, on his terms, on his schedule, according to his preferences." He chuckled softly. "He was general manager for 21 years. I was head butler. In our professional relationship, there was never any question about who outranked whom." "Did anything strange ever happen with Morris?" I asked, "given the hotel being what it is?" Fred looked at me over his spectacles. "Morris," he said carefully, "knew things. I will say that. He would sit at the end of a hallway and simply stare at a room, sometimes for an hour, not moving, not blinking, just watching something that wasn't there, or wasn't there that we could see." He paused. "There were rooms he would not enter. Room 218. He would sit outside the door sometimes, but he never went in. And there was one stretch of the third-floor corridor, near room 419, where he would stop dead and his tail would go straight down and he would back up and take a different way around. Fred nodded slowly. Animals know. They always know. He stood up, placed his hat on his head, and looked at us. Morris passed in 1994. We gave him a proper funeral. Over 300 people came. He said this without any self-consciousness whatsoever. He's buried on the grounds, behind the hotel near the swimming pool. There's a headstone. People still visit it. He tucked his chair in. Come on. We'll pay our respects first, then start the tour. 2. The grounds. We walked out through the hotel's rear gardens into the Ozark morning. The air smelled of pine and turned earth and something faintly sweet that I couldn't name. Fred moved through the garden paths with the unhurried authority of a man who had walked them 10,000 times. He brought us to a quiet corner near the pool, where a small weathered headstone sat beneath an old tree. It read simply, Morris, General Manager, 1973 to 1994. Fred stood there for a moment with his hands in his vest pockets. Jasper, who had followed us out from the dining room, sat down a few feet from the stone and stared at it in that particular way cats stare at things, as though seeing something layered underneath. Frisco came after Morris, Fred said. Sweet cat. 6 toes on each front paw. You've never seen anything like it. These enormous polydactyl paws. He was known for following guests he took a liking to and sleeping across their feet. Also for chasing things down hallways that weren't there. He smiled at the memory. Guests used to report hearing him tear around a corner in the night, claws on the floor, and they'd open their door and find him sitting perfectly still in the corridor, staring at the wall. We stood a moment longer in the garden. Then Fred turned and walked along the edge of the property, away from the pool, toward a section of the grounds where the old landscaping gave way to rougher terrain, near what appeared to be a former service area behind the building. He stopped. In February, he said, his voice dropping to its quietest register. Some men were doing landscaping work back here, digging up this area for a parking expansion. He looked at the ground. They found bottles, jars, hundreds of them buried in the dirt. Over 500 they eventually counted. Marcus looked at the ground as though expecting to see something still there. Most of them were Norman Baker's elixirs. His so-called cancer cure, whatever poison he was selling those poor, desperate people. But not all of them. Fred's voice stayed level and flat. Some of those jars contained human tissue, tumors, specimens. A surgical pathologist examined them. One jar contained what she identified as a bed sore, tissue surgically removed from a living person. He let that settle. Baker was never licensed to perform surgery, never licensed to do anything. And yet, the Ozark wind moved through the old trees above us. 500 bottles, Fred said. Think about what that represents. Think about how many people. Think about those families who sent their loved ones here with their last savings, their last hope, and got back, what, a telegram, a body? Or nothing at all, just silence, and Baker counting his money. He shook his head slowly. They also found an old bone saw, and film reels. Baker made films of his patients before and after his treatments. For promotion. He turned and looked back at the hotel, its white Victorian facade bright against the Ozark Hills, gorgeous and serene as a postcard. Beautiful building, he said quietly. Beautiful, terrible building. He took us around to a small sheltered garden area, slightly apart from the main grounds, a pet cemetery, with neat little markers going back decades. Several of the hotel's cats were buried here, their names inscribed on simple stones. Frisco, others before him. Fred walked the rows slowly, reading names, the way you read names in any cemetery, with respect, with memory. This hotel has always taken its cats seriously, he said, and the cats have always taken the hotel seriously in return. Jasper, our current fellow, he patrols. Every morning, every night. There are parts of the building he watches more carefully than others. He stopped by one of the markers. I used to think the cats were just curious. After 60 years, I believe they're doing something purposeful. I don't know what exactly, but purposeful. He straightened up. Now, he said, shall we go inside? 3. The basement. He took us first down to the basement. The boiler room, the laundry, the long service corridors that ran beneath the hotel like the roots of an old tree. The ceilings were low, and the light was the color of old butter. Our footsteps sounded different down here. Softer somehow, absorbed by stone and time. I was 15 years old when I first came down here, Fred said, running one hand along the old stone wall as he walked. A foreman sent me to check the pressure gauges on the boilers, middle of the night in November, and I came around that corner right there. He pointed to a bend in the corridor where the light didn't quite reach, and there was a woman standing there in a white dress. She was pushing something, like a cart or a gurney. He said the last word carefully. She was moving slow, and the wheels were making this sound, a squeak, squeak, rattle, and I just froze. I was 15 years old, and I froze. She went around the corner ahead of me, and I counted to 30 before I moved. When I came around, there was nothing there. No woman, no cart, just that long, empty hallway. He looked at us. I went back upstairs and told the foreman I'd checked the gauges. Had you? Marcus asked. I had not, Fred said, and permitted himself a small smile. He led us around a corner and stopped in front of a heavy door. In 1937, this building wasn't a hotel, he said. It was a hospital, run by a man named Norman Baker. He said the name the way people say the names of storms they've lived through. Baker was not a doctor. He had no medical license, no training, nothing, but he put up a sign and he told people, dying people, desperate people, that he could cure their cancer. And they came. From all over the country they came. They brought their savings, they brought their families, they brought their last scraps of hope. And Baker took it, all of it. The money, the hope, everything. He pushed open the door. The room beyond was cold in a way that had nothing to do with air conditioning. It was a deep, settled coldness, the kind that lives in stone and doesn't leave. In the center of the room sat a long metal table, an autopsy table, its surface dull with age. Along one wall, a heavy metal door, slightly ajar, led into a walk-in freezer. This was his morgue, Fred said simply. Neither Marcus nor I moved to enter the room. Those jars they dug up behind the hotel recently, the specimens, the tissue samples, many of them came from this room, this table. He looked at the autopsy surface with an expression I couldn't entirely read. Patients died upstairs. They were brought down here. Then they were moved, not to hospitals, not to families in many cases, to a dump site in the dirt outback, sealed in glass jars, because Baker wanted to hide every trace of what he'd done. He put one hand on the doorframe, not entering. The maintenance man I replaced, old Amos, who I knew well, he told me that one night, maybe 1938, he came down here to check on the washers. They were in the next room over. Fred gestured through the wall. He said every single one of them turned on by itself, in the middle of the night. Doors were locked from the outside. Nobody in there. Just the machines going, all of them, together. He let that sit for a moment. I personally witnessed that same thing in 1952, he said quietly. I was 29 years old, and I knew this hotel well by then. I was not a frightened boy anymore. And I tell you, when those machines all came on at once in that dark room with nobody in it, I was frightened. I was very, very frightened. A sound came from somewhere in the corridor behind us. A faint, rhythmic squeak, then a rattle, then silence. Marcus grabbed my arm. Fred closed the door, unhurried. She walks these halls, he said simply. She has walked them since before I was born. I don't know who she was, what her name was, who sent her here with hope and got back a jar buried in the dirt. But she's here. She pushes that gurney up and down these corridors, and she always will. He straightened his hat. Come, there's more to see. 4. The third floor. He took us up through the back staircase to the third floor corridor. The carpet runner here was deep red. The wallpaper was cream with a fine stripe. The hallway stretched long in both directions, and the old brass sconces on the walls gave off a light that made everything look slightly like a memory. Room 419, Fred said, stopping in front of a door midway down the hall. This was where Dr. Baker kept some of his female patients in the worst stages of their illness. He lowered his voice slightly, though there was no one nearby. Over the years, a number of the housekeeping staff have met a woman on this floor. She comes around a corner, or she's standing in a doorway, and she introduces herself. Says her name is Theodora. Says she was a patient here. He paused. And then she's gone. Just gone. Between one blink and the next. He looked at us steadily. I met Theodora myself. Once. In 1961. I was walking this hallway early in the morning before the guests were up. I came around from the stairwell, and she was standing right there. He pointed to a spot on the carpet not 10 feet from us. In a light blue robe, her hair pinned up, she looked at me very calmly and said, "Good morning. I'm Theodora. I'm one of Dr. Baker's patients." And I said good morning, because that is what you say. He smiled thinly, and then she was not there anymore. Neither Marcus nor I said anything. "I will tell you something," Fred said. "In all my years in this hotel, Theodora never frightened me. She seemed peaceful. Whatever peace is for someone who went through what those patients went through. She seemed to have found some version of it." He began walking again, and we followed. As we passed a window at the end of the hall, I glanced out at the grounds below and could just make out the small headstone by the pool. Morris's marker. Something orange moved near it. Jasper, I told myself. Just Jasper, patrolling the grounds. The orange shape sat perfectly still, facing the hotel. "There are others that are not so peaceful," Fred said. "V, room 218. He brought us to the second floor. Room 218. He stopped in front of it and put his hands in his vest pockets and regarded the door the way a man regards something he respects. "Michael," he said. He pronounced it with a slight weight, as though it were a title as much as a name. His name was Michael. He was an Irish stonemason, one of the men who built this hotel in 1886. During construction, before the walls were finished, he was working on the upper section of what is now this room, and he fell. Long fall. He didn't survive. He put one hand on the doorframe. "I have been in this room more times than I can count. I have changed light bulbs in this room, repaired the window sash in this room, stood outside this room, in the middle of the night because guests were pounding on the door from inside, saying it had locked itself and would not open." He looked at us. "That happened more than once. Door locks from inside, and whatever is holding it doesn't let go until it decides to." Marcus shifted his weight. I found myself looking at the crack under the door. Something in the room beyond, in the thin dark line of the gap, looked fractionally different from the hallway light around it. Fractionally, impossibly darker. "In 1958, Fred continued, "I was in this room doing some repair to the window frame, alone. It was early afternoon, perfectly quiet, and I heard, from directly above me, from the ceiling, the sound of a man falling, a crash and a cry, and then silence." He looked up at the ceiling, then back at us. "Workmen heard that cry in 1886, when it happened, and it has not stopped happening since." He paused. "I was also in this room in 1971 when both lights went out at once, and in the mirror on the bathroom wall, I saw two hands, not in the room, in the mirror. Just hands, coming forward from the dark in the glass, as though someone on the other side was trying to find the surface." He said this in a tone of such matter-of-fact calm that it was somehow worse than if he'd whispered it. I said, "Michael, I'm just fixing the radiator. I'll be out directly." And I went back to work, because in this hotel, you learn to go about your business." He glanced at us. Morris never set foot in this room either. 21 years, every inch of this hotel, not this room. That told me more than anything else I'd seen. 6. Back to the beginning. We came back downstairs to the crystal dining room, where it had all started. The breakfast hour was winding down. Fred poured himself a final cup, and we sat in the afternoon light coming through the tall windows. He told us about the Christmas tree, the one that had been found on the other end of the dining room from where the staff had left it. Chairs circled around it like an audience. He told it with amusement. He told us about the waitress who'd seen the couple in the mirror, the man in Victorian formal dress who'd turned and made eye contact. And he said simply, "She quit that afternoon. Can't say I blamed her." He told us about the man who was sometimes seen at a table near the windows, the one who said he was waiting for a beautiful woman he'd seen there the night before. Fred glanced at the table in question as he said it. We both looked. There was no one there. "Sometimes when I'm here in the morning," he said, gesturing around the dining room, "before the staff come in, before anyone's here, I hear dancing, music that isn't there, and the sound of shoes on a ballroom floor." He set down his cup. "I've been here 60 years, one way and another. I don't know what this place is exactly. I don't know what holds all of this here. All these people, all these years, all these happenings. But something does." He folded his hands. "This hotel does not let go." Jasper reappeared from somewhere, leaping silently onto the empty fourth chair, resuming his sentry position, facing the room exactly as he had that morning. Fred looked at the cat. The cat looked at the room. "He came on Halloween," Fred said again, softly, almost to himself. "Long black fur, white paws, knows every inch of this building, watches the places that need watching." He picked up his hat. "Morris sent him, I sometimes think. Morris knew this hotel needed looking after." He said goodbye to us at the front entrance, shaking both our hands with that enormous grip. He thanked us for being, good listeners. He said most young people were in too much of a hurry to really hear what a place was telling them. Then he put on his hat, turned, and walked back inside. Marcus and I stood there in the Ozark afternoon light for a moment without speaking. "Good Lord," Marcus finally said. "Yeah," I agreed. 7. Delroy's news. 2 days later at the wedding reception, the string quartet was playing, and the champagne was cold, and our friend Delroy, the groom, beaming and magnificent in his suit, found us by the bar. "How was the tour?" he asked, clapping us both on the shoulders. "Did you love the Ozarks?" "Delroy," I said. "Old Fred was incredible. That was one of the most extraordinary afternoons I've ever had." Delroy's face changed. The smile stayed, but something shifted underneath it. He lowered his champagne. "Old Fred?" "Fred Holloway," Marcus said. "You said to find him in the dining room, right corner by the window." "I sent you that message weeks ago," Delroy said slowly. "I meant to call you and update it, but with all the preparations, the venue, the flowers, the family." He stopped. He looked at both of us. "Guys, old Fred died last month." The string quartet played on. Someone laughed across the room. A champagne cork popped. "He had a stroke," Delroy said quietly. "Peacefully," they said. "In his sleep. Up at the hotel. He'd had his morning coffee in the dining room like always, and..." I looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at me. I thought about the enormous warm handshake at the front door, the coffee cup steaming on the table, the patient dark eyes over the rims of the spectacles, the way he'd said, "This hotel does not let go." The way he'd stood at Morris's headstone with his hands in his vest pockets, and that expression of, what, tenderness? Kinship? And I thought about Jasper, who had followed us through the tour, who had come out to the pet cemetery and sat near the stone, watching, who had resumed his position at the table as though completing a routine he'd performed 1,000 times. Had the hostess seen Fred that morning? Had any of the other diners? Or had she seen two bewildered young men crossing the dining room toward a corner table where an old man sat, who no one else could see. Drinking coffee he'd ordered every morning for 60 years in a hotel that simply would not let him go. 8. The night. That night, we moved everything into one room. Marcus dragged his suitcase down the hall at 10:30, and we deadbolted the door and turned on every lamp and didn't say much. We'd put the television on for noise, a rerun of something neither of us watched. I was on the bed nearest the door. Marcus had the far bed. Outside, the Ozarks were dark, and the hotel was settling into its nighttime self, those old Victorian timbers contracting in the cooling air, making sounds that were almost like footsteps. Almost. At 11:15, the television turned off by itself. Not the picture. The sound first. Gone. Mid-sentence. The anchor's voice cut clean. And then the screen, folding to black in a way that didn't look like a power failure. More deliberate than that. The way you'd switch something off if you wanted the room quiet, and we both sat up. The room was very dark now. Just the thin strip of hall light under the door and the faint blue residue of the dead screen. Marcus reached for the remote and clicked. Nothing. Clicked again. Nothing. He got up and pressed the physical button on the set. It came back on, loud and bright. He turned the volume down with shaking hands and came back to his bed without a word. We lay there listening. At midnight, the footsteps started. Not downstairs. Not in a distant room. In the corridor directly outside our door. A slow, deliberate walk. Heel. Toe. Heel. Toe. Moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who knew exactly where they were going and had all the time in the world to get there. They moved toward our door and slowed. Stopped. Marcus had his eyes open. I had mine. We were both perfectly still, the way you go still when every instinct says don't move. The footsteps started again after perhaps 30 seconds and continued down the hall, fading until there was nothing. I checked my phone. 12:33 a.m. Marcus said, barely audible, "Do not open that door." I was not going to open that door. At some point after 2, I must have drifted because I came awake suddenly, fully, the way you do when something pulls you back. The room was unchanged, lamps on, television running, but the air felt different, occupied. I lay still, with my eyes adjusting, and looked toward the small desk in the corner, and there was, for just a moment, the shape of something sitting there. Not distinct, not a figure exactly. A density in the air, a presence that displaced the light slightly differently than nothing would. I lay there looking at it, and it seemed to look back. Then it was not there anymore. The hall, after that, was quiet. At around 3 a.m., from somewhere outside, from the direction of the pool, the garden, Morris's corner of the grounds, came a sound. A single long, resonant sound I can only describe as a meow, except that it wasn't quite right. It was deeper than any cat I'd ever heard, and slower, and it lasted longer than it should have. And when it was done, the night was so absolutely silent that the silence itself felt like a presence. Marcus was awake. He'd heard it. Neither of us spoke. Just before dawn, at that hour when the sky goes from black to the gray blue of cold water, I heard one more thing. From directly under our window, outside in the garden, the slow, rhythmic creak of someone rocking in a chair, back and forth, patient as breathing. It went on for some time, and then it stopped. 9. The note. We were packed before sunrise. We checked out at dawn. The young woman at the front desk smiled at us and said she hoped we'd enjoyed our stay. We said we had. I don't know why we said that. We carried our bags out through the front entrance and loaded the car, and I looked back once at the hotel, white and grand and still against the Ozark Hills, its windows gold with early light. In the far right window of the crystal dining room, at the corner table, something moved. The shape of someone sitting down, or standing up, or simply being there. I couldn't be sure at that distance. I didn't look long. A string of a reservation card was tucked under my windshield wiper. I assumed it was from the hotel, a survey or a goodbye. When I unfolded it, it was blank on the front. On the back, in handwriting I did not recognize, old-fashioned, precise, a penmanship that belonged to a different era, were 4 words. Thank you for listening. I put it in my pocket. I still have it. Epilogue. What remains? The 1886 Crescent Hotel and Spa stands today, as it has since the Gaslight era, grand and white against the Ozark Hills, its windows looking out over Eureka Springs. 11. Morris's headstone still receives visitors near the pool in the quiet of the old garden. The pet cemetery rests in the shade of the hotel grounds. The bottle grave gave up its secrets in 2019 and was closed again. The morgue table remains in the basement. Ghost tours run nightly. Jasper, long black fur, white paws, still patrols the building each morning and night. The staff say he always stops at the same corner of the crystal dining room to sit for a while